Welcome. We're so excited to have you here with us this afternoon for What Can Mother Trees Teach Us About Climate Justice? I'm Linda Nowlin. I'm the Senior Director here at the Sustainability Hub at UBC, and we're so excited to be hosting this event with our colleagues from UBC Forestry, Dr. Suzanne Simard and Dr. Danielle Ignace, as well as with our co-sponsors, the Sierra Club of BC and CPAWS-BC, the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society of BC. So I'm going to turn it over now to Musqueam Elder Larry Grant for a welcome and land acknowledgement, back to me for a few words, and then I will introduce our moderator for this afternoon's event.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really nice to be here. CAM to CAS. Ayasak, Guanasquich, Tenitinat from Askew. Block Sessioener, Capelano, Cos Hiloxto, the Huinas, Emignetten, Cos for to the Sans Tomokat from Askew. Say Equinassioener, set to something need to follow. The Hiloxtala, the Mokalap, Cos for to Cosayar, Tenawea. One in the eye, Tennis Qualawan, could see. To some noch, because yes, it's talk to mix them all, because he looks to the secret which we eat and not tomok high chapka sim nasya say some he looks all high chapka. Want to say thank you for having me here today. Sayasak is my Musqueam name. I am a descendant of Teoplanov, the warrior that was here to greet the first visitors to arrive off our shores, the Spanish under Captain Narvaez and the English under Captain George Vancouver. And as our warrior had said in the day, welcome to the people I do today, and welcome everyone that's here and also logged on this program. It's wonderful to hear the words and the study that trees literally talk to each other and work together to support each other. As our elders had always said before, everything in this world is interconnected. Everything has a living, driving force, a spirit. And it's always our responsibility as people to be saying thank you to the trees and all of the living creatures in the world that sustain us. Give thanks to the trees when you harvest the berries, the leaves, the bark, and the wood, so that the spirit knows what you're doing with it and you're not just destroying it. And that's something that our old people always told us. Give thanks every time you harvest something, because there is a spirit in those things that you harvest. So that's really, really good to hear that the study is showing many things like that, that we do not know why they do that, but they do. And it's very much like human beings. We cannot sustain ourselves by ourselves. We need help, and we need other people to assist us to stay alive. So that, I think, is part of what we're going to hear today, and it's wonderful to hear. So, Colette Quincy Ziatala, Deswallop of Enama, Shwi Tanawel, I tap Ewa Siam Nasia, Siatom, Aichka. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for such a warm welcome and for the wisdom of your elders. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you. So this event is part of our climate justice series that we started over a year ago, last March. UBC declared a climate emergency back in 2019, and then commissioned a report from the community led by a professor and by a student, the Climate Emergency Task Force Report, which was adopted a year ago in February. And the report seeks to embed climate justice throughout all of UBC's climate work, academic work, operations, community partnerships. Climate justice, what does it mean? Well, at its core, it's about the disproportionate impact that climate change is having on people and on nature. Those who are experiencing the worst impacts did the least to cause the problem. And we need to address climate justice if we're really going to tackle climate change appropriately. So today it's so exciting to be hearing about climate change and forests and trees, and especially mother trees, and how they interact with Indigenous knowledge and wisdom and science. Now I'm going to turn it over to today's moderator, who I will introduce. We're so excited to have Dr. Danielle Ignace with us today. It's such a pleasure. She joined UBC this year as an Assistant Professor of Forest and Conservation Science. This is one of her areas of expertise, so it's wonderful that she's moderating the panel. She's an ecophysiologist. She's an enrolled member of the Coeur d'Alene tribe south of the border. And she's recently been selected as a social equity fellow, among other honors. Her full bio is in the program. She's committed to indigenizing the curriculum and committed to working with community in her research. And since she's joined, we've been so thrilled here at the Sustainability Hub because we've had the pleasure of working with her already. So over to you, Danielle, and thanks again to everyone for being here, and especially Elder Larry Grant for your warm welcome.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Linda, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you to Elder Larry Grant for your wisdom and your welcoming words. It's such an honor to be new to UBC and be here to moderate today's discussion, which I have to thank again for the UBC Sustainability Hub, the Sierra Club of BC, and CPAWS-BC to bring us all together today to talk about finding mother trees, climate litigation, and Indigenous knowledge. And this is a special Earth Week event ahead of Earth Day, and I would argue every day is Earth Day, especially as we consider these important topics today. It's also my great honor and privilege as a new person, a new professor at UBC, to introduce my new colleague and someone everyone knows, Dr. Suzanne Simard, Professor of Forest and Conservation Sciences. Suzanne Simard is the author of the book, Finding the Mother Tree. She is known for her work on how trees interact and communicate using below ground fungal networks, which has led to the recognition that forests have hub trees or mother trees, which are large, highly connected trees that play an important role in the flow of information and resources in a forest. Her current research investigates how these complex relationships contribute to forest resiliency, adaptability, and recovery, and has far-reaching implications for how to manage and heal forests from human impacts, including climate change. Suzanne has published over 200 peer-reviewed articles and has communicated her work to a wide audience through interviews, documentary films, and her TED Talk, How Trees Talk to One Another. So I will now turn it over to Dr. Suzanne Simard to tell us about what mother trees can teach us about climate justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ignace, and thank you, Elder Larry Grant. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for the Sierra Club. Thank you, UBC Sustainability Hub. Thank you, CPAWS. And thank you everybody for just being here and being here for the trees. So I'm gonna share my screen and hope this works. How does that look? Okay, great. So I'm going to talk about mother trees and climate. These things are tightly interrelated. And you know, we live in a beautiful landscape on the west coast of North America, which is a forested landscape. And our climate, our mountains, our rivers, the ocean, they all are connected as one to gift us with these incredible forests. These forests, and you're looking here at a West Coast forest, are some of the biggest biodiversity hotspots in the world and the biggest carbon sinks in the world. In fact, forests worldwide house about 80% of species, terrestrial species. They store about 80% of our carbon. And in Canada, they're the origin of about 80% of our fresh water. So 80 is a big number. And that's one number you can all remember. Forests have an outsized influence on our global cycles. And I just want to illustrate with this photo here. This is a map, of course, of the world, and it shows carbon stocks. And just focus in on where we are. We're on the West Coast forests of North America. And when we look for things like indicators like carbon accumulation in these West Coast forests, these Pacific Rim forests, what we find is that their rate of accumulation is about equivalent to what's in the Amazon rainforest. The rate of carbon accumulation is at the highest level in the world. And uniquely in our forests of North America, a lot of that carbon is stored below ground, so it's really safe. In fact, Canada houses about 25% of the global soil carbon. So that gives us a great responsibility and a great gift to look after these forests for the globe. And what gives us that great carbon storage capacity, that great source of water and clean air, is because these forests are also among the most biodiverse forests of the world. This is a marbled murrelet on the west coast of Vancouver Island near Fairy Creek. And you know, the marbled murrelet and all the hundreds of species that this bird associates with is what gives the great strength and ability of these forests to cycle carbon, to cycle nutrients, and to cycle water. And they really do depend on old growth forests. Without an old growth forest, this marbled murrelet would not be here, would not be able to nest and carry out its life cycle. And if you want to find out more about the great attributes of old growth forests and how important they are, you can go to this website that I have here at the bottom. It's got a lot of really good scientific information on old growth forests. Now, one of the other reasons that our West Coast Pacific Rim forests are so important in the global cycles is because they're salmon forests. We have this great gift of creation that salmon spawn in our rivers that run through our great valleys within our mountain systems, and the salmon actually feeds the forest. They actually fertilize the forest. And the way the salmon gets into the forest is through the bears and the wolves and the eagles and the biodiversity in the animal kingdom. These things are all linked together, as Elder Larry told us. And this idea that linkage and connection and relationships builds forests runs throughout all forests in the world. It runs throughout our own communities as well. And in this talk, I'm going to show you just how forests show us that these relationships and connections and ability to communicate among species is so crucial to our well-being and our ability to fight climate change. So one of the great ways that our forests have become so productive and have remained so iconic over the centuries is because the First Nations people, the Indigenous people of North America, cared for these forests for millennia, for thousands and thousands of years. This is a man, he's of the Splatsin Nation, and he's on the Shuswap River. The Shuswap River is where I grew up. I came from a settler family, but we settled into this area that the Splatsin had been living in for thousands of years. And what you're looking at here is a way that this man is actually fishing for salmon in that river, the spawning salmon. And you can see a weir, it's got different slats that go, or wooden slats that cross the river. And through these slats is where the salmon go upstream to spawn. And what the slats in the weir allow is a kind of a winnowing or a sort of a selection of size of fish that can go upstream. And this allowed the nation to actually allow a big old fecund mother fish to go upstream to spawn. And by doing this, this is a type of stewardship that always ensured that the populations of the salmon were strong and that the fish were large. And this weir system also allowed the nation to keep track of the fish, to know when the populations were going up and down. And so this is a kind of stewardship that is based on ancient knowledge of living in this land, in these rivers for thousands of years. And this is what has led to the productivity of these forests. This stewardship, this caring for this land, this responsibility is expressed in so many ways in Indigenous art and culture. This is an image by April White of the Haida Nation. And what she's doing here in this canoe is returning the salmon bones to the waters. And this celebration or this cultural practice is a way of giving thanks and giving back to the rivers which provided the salmon. And in so doing, she's also returning the calcium and magnesium and the nutrients of those bones, and in so doing, keeping the waters rich and productive for salmon populations. So here, culture and ecology and biology are all intertwined together. They're all connected together. Now, since settlement of North America, these forests have been under a great deal of stress. And so starting in the mid part of the 1900s and even before, we started, as colonists, clear cutting these great lands. And these lands, and there's, as you know, there's a long history here of rights and title and sovereignty that have been ignored, and we're trying to sort of reach some kind of reconciliation over this injustice. But really, the clear cutting of our forests has got profound implications for Indigenous people, but all of us together who live on this globe. And I would say that still, that there is, until we have justice in forests, there will be no justice for climate either. So we've got to come together to find a resolution for this. The other thing that comes along with clear cutting is the replanting of these ancient forests with tree farms. Now, you've probably heard that tree planting is a good thing, and it is a good thing for climate change, but it's got to be done carefully. And the way that we've done it in the past has actually resulted in a reduction in biodiversity of these forests. And this reduction in biodiversity not only reduces productivity and carbon capture of forests, it also increases the risk of disease and pathogens and also wildfire. And we are all living with this today. We all know and in our own personal lives that wildfire, for example, is affecting our daily lives. And all of these things feed back together to create what we know as a climate emergency. So we've gone from a very healthy landscape inherited and stewarded by Indigenous nations for millennia to being changed in a dramatic way over the last century and a half, leading to this climate emergency. So forests, on average, they store a lot of carbon. They also, when they're cut, actually are responsible for about 20% of our carbon emissions. And this is in addition to what's being emitted by fossil fuels. And so we know to solve this climate emergency, we also need to look to forests to restore them and so that they can continue to soak up carbon from the atmosphere. So I just want to tell you a little bit about how mother trees play into this. So what is a mother tree? Mother trees are really just the old forests in an old growth forest, or the old trees in an old forest. They're the biggest, oldest trees. This is a mother tree right here. And these trees have an outsized value in forests because they sequester far more carbon than their smaller neighbors. They house more biodiversity, and they're the most highly connected trees in the forest. So let me explain that a little bit. These forests, of course, are underlain by huge fungal networks, and these are kinds of fungi that help trees to grow. There are many kinds of fungi. There are literally thousands of species worldwide, but this kind of fungus, the mycorrhizal fungus, is a helper fungus that provides nutrients and water to trees in exchange for photosynthate or sugars. And it turns out in our research, we found that these fungi actually link trees together. And to illustrate this in the best way, we have made a map of what a network can look like in a forest. So we actually made a map of a network in a Douglas fir forest, and we found a lot of important things. But the first thing is that all of the trees in this forest, which are represented by these green circles, are linked together by mycorrhizal fungi, which are represented by these black lines. And so we found that all of the trees are linked together, and that the biggest, oldest trees, these hub trees, are the most highly linked. So this old tree right here is actually linked to 80% of the other trees in this forest. What does that linkage do? It provides avenues of communication, kind of like an internet. You can think of the underground as this vast internet where messages actually go from tree to tree through these fungal links. Some of those messages are resources like water and carbon and nutrients, and these old trees share these resources with their smaller and younger neighbors. And that is especially important for the smaller trees like these little yellow seedlings, because they actually are given a head start by the sharing of nutrients by their elders, their old neighbors. In fact, these little seedlings have about a 4 times greater chance of survival than if they are not connected to the old trees. And so this nurturing ability of the trees has led us to call these trees mother trees. We also know that the seedlings that are related to these old trees, their own kin, their own offspring, are helped the most. And so this really is a family, a society, a nurturing network. So one thing we also have discovered is that as these elders get older and older and they become, and they're accumulating more carbon, eventually they also do pass on to the spirit world. And as they're doing this, as they're passing on and dying, they actually send their carbon to their offspring. They're actually sending their energy and nutrients into the next generation of trees. A lot like we, nurture the next generation of our young people. In fact, in Aboriginal culture, it's 7 generations. And it's interesting because we have looked at generation after generation, and we found that as these old trees pass on this knowledge and wisdom and energy, it does actually pass from more than one generation. It's actually multiple generations that these signals carry on for. And even after these old mother trees have passed on, they still support the young seedlings coming up, even up through their own bodies, what we call coarse woody debris. And these ancient trees in the background are actually linked to these trees, even growing on this log through their fungal networks. And so really, when you're in the forest, think of this as this vastly connected place that has got this enormous internet underground where there's all these signaling going back and forth, just like it does in the World Wide Web. This is me actually in an ancient tree in Fairy Creek, which you've probably heard about, is one of the forests that are under a great deal of attention right now on the West Coast, because they're one of the few remaining old growth forests left in British Columbia. We have, of our iconic valley bottom forests, only 3% left. And so this has become there's great global attention to these forests. I'm actually inside of a 2,000-year-old tree here. I've got a headlamp on, and there's about 5 of us inside this living tree. What we're in is in a bear den. That bear comes back to this tree year after year to have cubs and passes on that knowledge to her cubs for the next generations. And so in my visit to Fairy Creek, and it was a great majestical thing to be in this tree. And it turns out that 2 weeks later, this tree was actually cut down in the process of the harvesting of these forests. And I just want to emphasize that, because as we speak, trees are falling, and the impacts of this tree falling is huge. It's important not just for our landscapes and bears and marbled muralets, it's important for climate justice. These forests are a great solution for climate change, and yet we are actually cutting down the very solutions that sit before us. And this is why young people, Aboriginal people of all walks of life are protesting or defending forests across our great nation, across Canada, across North America, across South America, all over the world, because this recognition that forests are worth more standing than they are lying down is a universal thing. It's even been recognized by the International Panel on Climate Change. And so I want to just end with, just to remind us that mother trees can teach us a great deal about climate justice, that connection is really where forests get their strength, their societies, they bring social values to forests. It allows old trees to protect young trees and the many generations to come down the road. They protect carbon and biodiversity. And I'm just going to also mention that the Sierra Club has got an invitation to action to help defend our forests and to help maintain their cover so that they can continue to be a solution to climate change and to actually increase that ability. So I'm just going to end also with my own final points here. We have actually are in the process with the help of the Sierra Club and other people to create what we are calling a mother tree network. And this mother tree network really is a natural solution to climate change. It's about saving the forests of the world and restoring them. And I'm just going to go through these little points here. The first paragraph here is a summary of what I've just said. And that is that forests are really important in regulating climate change. They hold most of the carbon, terrestrial carbon in the world, and most of the biodiversity. And remember that figure, 80%. But losses of forests to clear cutting globally are adding about 20% of our greenhouse gases. And so they are actually, and many forests, including those in Canada, have transitioned from being sinks for greenhouse gases to being sources, not just here, but also the Amazon forest. This is a really important thing. They are becoming, our activities in forests are part of the global problem. But solutions emerge from Indigenous knowledge systems. Remember how I demonstrated in my early slides how the Aboriginal people of Canada looked after the salmon and in so doing looked after the forests. All of these things are linked together. They're all based on this idea that everything is connected, that we are all one. And we can work with Indigenous people and knowledge systems and Western science to help our forests cope with climate change and adapt to climate change as we move forward. And we can use biomimicry principles like that from the mother tree. And so we can also have calls to action based on these principles. The first, and I just want to send out some great big ideas here. One is that we need to protect our remaining old growth forests. The second part of that point is we need to restore and increase the adaptive capacity of forests that have been damaged already. Especially in the rainforests, because they are the biggest carbon sinks and biodiversity hotspots of the world. And in order to do this, we need to support our Indigenous people so that they can help, they can work with all of us together, but especially on their own territories to protect these ancient forests where most of the carbon and biodiversity is already there. And to do this, we need to establish networks of learning communities. UBC is part of that. But we need more small scale communities in the forest so we can learn more, learn with our Indigenous brothers and sisters to disseminate that knowledge and try to get these ideas so that they're being used around the world to protect and restore our forests. And out of all this, in order to fund this, in order to make this work, we need to create a different kind of economy. One that's not based on exploitation of forests, such as I showed through clear cutting, but one that's based on a regenerative model, such as that through the Mother Tree Network. And there are ways to do this. And the emerging carbon markets is a really good start. It's a good place to really get going. And I would say that the world is coming online with this. And I think it's going to happen quickly if we all get on board. And if we do all of these things, scientists say that we can actually reduce climate threats by 1/3 by doing these things in forests. So I'm going to stop there and thank you so much for listening, and I'll hand it back over to Danielle.
Thank you, Suzanne. That was a beautiful representation of the powerful and nurturing connectedness of the mother trees. And it also shows us how this is a model for what we can be as a community and a society if we choose to listen to those lessons and principles from that model. It's my pleasure to introduce the next speaker of our panel, Hannah Askew, who is the Executive Director of the Sierra Club BC. Hannah is a lawyer and practiced public interest environmental law prior to joining Sierra Club BC. Her work focused on addressing the cumulative impacts of industrial development on ecosystems and advocating for proactive and inclusive planning processes for the land and water. Over the past 10 years of her career, Hannah has also been deeply involved in learning from Indigenous communities about their systems of law and governance. She worked as a researcher on Anishinaabe and Coast Salish legal orders for the Indigenous Law Research Unit at the University of Victoria, and researched Silcotin and Tunaha law as part of the Relay Project, Revitalizing Indigenous Law for Land, Air, and Water. Hannah holds degrees in history and anthropology, as well as a law degree. She was born on Anishinaabe territory into a family of English and Scottish descent. And I will now turn it over to Hannah to tell us about climate litigation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ignis, for that really kind introduction. I'm really honored to be here today and to be part of this panel. I've actually been looking forward to the talks from Dr. Suzanne Simard and Kevin Barlow all week, because they're two people whose work I have enormous admiration from. So really grateful to the UBC Sustainability Center for hosting this talk today. I'd also like to thank Elder Larry Grant for the welcome that he gave us, and for that reminder and encouragement to focus on reciprocity and gratitude for the trees and the other beings that we share our homes with. I always get quite nervous before I have to do a public presentation, and today was no different. So I went for a walk. I live in Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territory, right adjacent to Stanley Park. And so I went for a walk, and some of you might be familiar, there's a trail, Tatlow Trail, that has some really ancient cedar trees, 500, 600 years old on that trail. And it was so, it always kind of calms and grounds me to be around those trees. So yeah, I appreciate that invitation from Elder Larry Grant to remember that gratitude. I am going to talk a little bit today about some of the work that we are doing at Sierra Club BC right now, particularly in regards to a climate lawsuit that we recently filed against the BC government. So I'm going to give a brief overview of that lawsuit, and then I'm going to just talk, I'm going to situate that particular piece of our strategy in our kind of broader climate justice work, and in particular, how it connects to some of the Indigenous law and knowledge-based responses that we have to the climate crisis that we are currently facing, that we're working on at Sierra Club BC right now. So I've got a PowerPoint presentation, which I will share now. Okay, so yeah, I was asked to talk a little bit today about our recent climate litigation. So about 3 weeks ago, we filed a lawsuit against the BC government for some failures to meet some of the standards set out in the Climate Change Accountability Act under their 2021 report. Let's see. Oh. Sorry, I'm just trying to figure out how to get my PowerPoint to go on to the next slide here. There we go. So Sierra Club BC, represented by eco-justice lawyers, we're suing the BC government for not having a plan to achieve the climate targets that are set out in its own climate change legislation. So BC is often positioned as being a climate leader, and it is true that our government under the Clean BC plan has taken some really important steps towards emissions reduction, particularly in encouragement of electric vehicles and some other green technologies that it has been encouraging. However, its failure to comply with its own climate accountability legislation undermines its climate leadership credentials and commitment to transparency and accountability. So specifically under the climate change accountability legislation, there is a requirement for the BC government to produce plans about how they are going to get to their emissions reductions goals by 2025, by 2030, by 2040, and 2050. And so in the recent report from late 2021, there is not a plan that's articulated around how we're going to meet the 2025 goals or the 2040 goals or the 2050 goals. And so what our lawsuit is seeking is for the government to produce those plans so that we can see the steps that they are planning to take. As I'm sure all of you watching this are aware, there's a really clear scientific consensus now that we have a very short window to reduce the emissions before we really get into a future that will be really compromised ecologically for all of us. And so it's really critical that our government, along with other governments and jurisdictions around the world, have a clear plan in place and that they are held accountable to achieving those goals. So we were really disappointed that those plans were not included in the 2021 report, and the remedy that we are seeking from the courts is to ask our government to produce those reports for us. So BC continues currently to emit more and more carbon pollution while the impacts of the climate crisis are affecting lands and waters across the province in devastating ways. And all of us who live in territories across BC, I know, experienced that over the past year, and it was really scary living through the heat dome and the forest fires and you know, the impacts of that. And so it's I think all of us are seeing the urgency of shifting course in terms of the kind of economic development choices that we make, and making sure that that is done in a way that is consistent with meeting our climate commitments under international law and under domestic law as well. So I just wanted to share a quote that comes from the UN Secretary General that was included in the third part of the 6th annual IPCC report, which came out just after we filed our lawsuit, so a couple of weeks ago. And what he says is, the jury has reached a verdict and it is damning. This report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is a litany of broken climate promises. It is a file of shame cataloging the empty pledges that put us firmly on track towards an unlivable world. We are on a fast track to climate disaster. So those words are really scary to read. The third piece of the IPCC report details the commitments of governments and tracks whether or not they are meeting their commitments and their targets. And unfortunately, so many governments around the world, including our own, are regularly missing those targets. And so we felt at Sierra Club BC that that we needed to take this step to hold our government in the place where we live accountable for meeting its own commitments and making sure that we do not continue to exceed the limits that we've committed to and set for ourselves, and that we're also accountable to under international law and to the international community. So it was a very serious step for us to take the move of filing this lawsuit. It's not something that we did lightly. It was something that we did a lot of research into climate litigation in different jurisdictions around the world. We're super grateful to our colleagues at Ecojustice who are putting this case forward and who have been working so hard to do the filings for us and to prepare all the material. And we're hoping that both the move of asking for accountability for the government and hoping that we'll get that remedy from the court, that they'll have to produce their plans, but also the public conversation that it generates is going to lead us into a better future where we are more responsible for keeping those emissions down to levels that are going to create a better future for all of us. Yeah, so that is the reason that we filed the lawsuit. There's a lot more information about the specifics of the lawsuit, both on the Ecojustice website as well as on the Sierra Club BC website. But that is one tool that citizens around the world have, and there are many different forms that climate litigation is currently taking. There's a lot of you have probably heard there's been stories in the news about youth that have been suing both governments and fossil fuel companies for the cost that's happening to their future as a result of our shared failure to keep emissions down low. So some of those lawsuits have been really impactful, and there's different ways that climate litigation is being brought forward in different jurisdictions around the world. But it is a powerful tool that we as citizens have to ensure that our governments are working to create a safe future for us, and also for all of the other beings that we share the lands and waters with as well, and who are really suffering as well from the impacts of climate change that we're seeing now. So I wanted to transition now away from talking about this specific piece of our climate work to talking about some of our broader understanding of the root causes of climate change at Sierra Club BC, and some of the other pieces of work that we're doing to engage in climate justice and contributing towards climate justice and towards a better future. And I wanted to talk a little bit. So Dr. Ignis had mentioned in her introduction of me that in addition to being trained as a Canadian lawyer, I'm not currently practicing, but I did practice for a number of years. That in addition to that training, I was also really fortunate to receive training on Indigenous legal orders, and specifically I got some deeper education on Anishinaabe law. I spent a number of months living in the community of Nation, which is a reserve community on Georgian Bay, and I was there for a project that was being sponsored by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, as well as the Indigenous Law Research Unit at the University of Victoria, and led by Dr. Val Napoleon, who's a Cree legal scholar there. And as part of that project, I started to learn about the power of Indigenous legal orders and Indigenous law-based approaches to addressing environmental challenges. And so I just wanted to share with all of you one particular teaching that I was given from an elder there, and she gave me permission to share this teaching. She has passed away now, but she gave that permission to me before she died, and her name was Carleen Elliott. And when I met her, I was working on this project with the TRC, and she was living in the Madoki Senior Center. And I was there with my colleague, Lindsay Burrows, who's also a lawyer, and Anishinaabe, a member of the Nation community. And while we were working on this project, Carleen was one of the people who mentored and guided us through the process of learning about Anishinaabe law and the kind of strategies that it has to address harms that are occurring. And particularly in Anishinaabe law, women have a responsibility around taking care of the water. And so she particularly gave Lindsay and I a lot of instruction on that. And she talked about how she, as a little girl, had been taught to look after the water and to fulfill that responsibility. And she talked a lot about the relationship that she built from the time she was a little girl with the water, in terms of learning songs to sing to the water, talking to the water, giving gifts, asking the water for help, and also just doing what she could when the opportunity arose to protect the well-being of the water in different ways. And at the time that Lindsay and I were there, that was in 2012, and I was at the time a second year law student, the community was under a boil water advisory, and there was a lot of issues with water quality and protecting the health of the water in the community. And one of the things that Carleen spoke to us about was that she would sometimes observe people not caring for the water. So sometimes there would just be litter in the creeks or other waterways or other substances being put in. And it was something she was really worried about. And one morning, Lindsay and I were having breakfast. We were living in her grandparents' home on the reserve, and her aunt was living there as well. And her aunt, Jenny, came to breakfast one morning and said, "I have good news. I was at a band council meeting last night, and a bylaw was passed to protect the waterways. And from moving forward, there's going to be a fine if anyone is seen putting any litter in the streams or anything like that. And so it should make things better. And so Lindsay and I thought, well, great, this is really good news. We're going to go to over to the senior center. We're going to tell Carlene, and this will be good news for her. So we walked to the Madoki Center and went in for tea with Carlene. And when we told her the news, instead of looking happy as we'd expected, she just shook her head and she said to us, "Laws are for the lawless." And I was really at the beginning of my journey of learning about Indigenous law and Anishinaabe law specifically. But over the next months that I was in the community, I reflected a lot on what Carlene said there. And I came to understand that what she meant was that at the point when you need a written law on a piece of paper that has a consequence like a fine, you have moved so far away from the system of law that she grew up in, where that relationship with the water is simply part of who you are and part of how you understand yourself as a person, and the responsibilities that you uphold by being in relationship with that water are sacred in that sense. And so if that is how you're living and who you are, you would never throw garbage into the water or something like that, right? And you wouldn't need a law on the books to tell you that, because it's part of your identity. And so that was, for me, as a brand new Canadian law student, and also as someone who was brand new to learning about Anishinaabe law, even though I had grown up on Anishinaabe territory. As a settler, I had not learned to see or understand Anishinaabe law. That was the first time that I got a real glimpse of the power and the potential of Indigenous law and governance systems for addressing the environmental challenges that we're facing. And it really changed the trajectory of my career, because I could see that the Canadian laws that I was learning in law school and that we have to work with are quite weak in comparison to some of those Anishinaabe laws that I was beginning to learn about and was taught by the community members when I was living at Nayashinaming. So I wanted to share that. And then for my final slide, I wanted to talk briefly about a project that I'm really proud of that we have at Sierra Club BC. And this is a project that's led by my colleague Kwasanaut, Charlene George. So she's a senior member of our team. She's the cultural voice for our organization. She's also an artist. And this project is one that has been ongoing for a few years now. And it is a mural called Seen Through Watchers' Eyes, Between the Worlds. And there is a physical version of this mural that is hosted at a school in the Kwanggun territory in Victoria. And so Shar is a member of the Sauk community, and this mural she did with children at an elementary school, and it's a giant mural that's up in their schoolyard, and the children helped her with painting it. But it shows the past, present, and future of the territory on southern Vancouver Island, seen through the eyes of the wild woman and the wild man, who are really important figures in Coast Salish understandings. And so a version of this lies online, and what to me is so beautiful and powerful about it is that it teaches us how to be in better relationship with the beings on those territories. So if you click on any one of those beings that you see in the online version, and it's hosted on our website, you will get teachings. Charlene worked with 2 Indigenous youth who traveled around to 6 different Coast Salish communities on southern Vancouver Island, and had elders and community members contribute knowledge about each of the beings. So you'll hear stories, there's songs and teachings about how to be in good relationship with those beings. And so Shar explained to me and the youth also that worked on this project that this was a climate action project because it helps to restore the relationships that were disrupted through colonization and that have continued to be disrupted, and that the disruption of those respectful relationships is the root cause of climate change. And so that in order to address climate change at its root, we have to look at restoring those relationships. And so this is this is a really kind of at the heart, I would say, of climate work that we are doing at Sierra Club BC as we work as an organization, mostly settler-based organization, to learn and relearn how to be in respectful relationships with beings on the territories that we live on, and to understand how that is really at the heart of addressing the climate and ecological crisis that we face now. Yeah, so I will end there and pass things back over to Dr. Ignis. I really appreciate the opportunity to share this with all of you today.
Thank you, Hannah, for sharing those beautiful examples of Indigenous knowledge. And thank you to Hannah and Sierra Club of BC for taking a stand for our future. And I think this sends a very powerful message to the government that we need a real plan, and a plan right now if we are to address the climate emergency. I'll next introduce Kevin Barlow, who is the Executive Director of Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society, the British Columbia chapter. Kevin is Mi'kmaq from New Brunswick, now living in North Vancouver, British Columbia on the Capilano Reserve. He is grounded in his culture and is proud of the fact that the majority of his career, spanning over 4 decades, has been serving Indigenous people. Kevin recently joined the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society of BC, or CPAWS-BC, and is part of a leading change to decolonize the work that CPAWS-BC does. I will now turn it over to Kevin.
Manali Askek Nogamadud. It's good to see you, my relatives, and I'll try to keep this short because I know we're off schedule, and unfortunately I have a meeting right at 5:30, so I have to run to that. I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to start my talk with the end of the story, the ending of a story, and it's a Hopi prophecy that I like to share with people. When the earth is ravaged and the animals are dying, a new tribe of people shall come unto the earth from many colors, creeds, and classes, and who by their actions and deeds shall make the earth green again. They shall be known as the warriors of the rainbow. And so that's a Hopi prophecy, and essentially that's could be my talk. I don't need to say any more. That's our call to action. You know, we must be finding a way to, you know, stop what's happening. You know, we are living beyond our means, you know. And why I share that story is that I prefer to offer hope instead of saying the world is ending, you know, that we're reaching a point of no return, because what kind of motivation is that for anybody to make any change if they say, well, I can't do anything, I can't stop this, I might as well just give up. And so I try to bring it back to that kind of message that our people saw things, you know, our elders dreamed things, and they knew what was coming. And so even though they saw this devastation that was coming, they also saw that there would be a turning point, that we would somehow come together and try to make this Mother Earth green again, you know. So I also do it because I don't want to be underestimating the power of Mother Earth or the power of creation. Because to me, I'm a human, I have limited powers, and to me, Creator has all the power, you know. So even though it might cause a lot of chaos and havoc, you know, I truly believe that there will be a way forward, you know. I am told that by elders that we are entering a period of great chaos. They actually think it was going to start around 2030, but I actually think we're in it now. So what we saw in BC in the last year with heat domes and fires and mudslides and knocking out the infrastructure and all these things, you know, that's just a glimpse of what is going to be happening, not only in North America, but across the world. And this will tell us something, you know. So, you know, it's interesting that Dr. Simard refers to the mother tree. You know, if you think of a mother is a life giver, right? But we also know the look of a mother when you've overstepped your bounds. You know, they don't have to say anything. They just have to give you that look, and you know that you got to straighten out. And I think that's what Mother Earth is doing right now, is it's sending us this message. It's telling us to look. and to correct ourselves, because we're doing things that are going to cause more damage. You know, Indigenous people followed natural laws. Some people say that we are the true scientists because we saw how our actions had impacts. And so we only took what we needed. We never took more than what we needed. We never wasted anything. Even something that was dying, a tree that was dying, might be producing medicines for us. We were able to work with anything, you know. And that's the Indigenous knowledge that I speak of, that we need to help turn this situation around. You know, so when we talk of climate justice, you wonder about that. So justice might be, you know, a system where I know Merriam-Webster defines it as conformity to truth, fact, or reason. So if you think of somebody who might take the life of somebody, and then they're given a fair trial, their peers on a jury find them guilty or not guilty, and then they're given a punishment, you know, is that justice? I don't know. And it's the same thing with climate. The climate can't speak in the words that we talk, but they can speak to us if we listen. All we have to do is open our eyes, be amongst nature, feel the energy that's coming from that. And that will put us back on the path. It will center us, just as Hannah was describing how she went for a walk to calm herself. You know, it seems ironic that the people that suffer most from climate change are the people that are not causing it. Indigenous people, like the Inuit of the North, you know, they're losing their habitat. Polar bears are having to leave. They can't fish, and whales and seal and things like that. And there's no industry up there that is causing climate change. So they're suffering because of the system that we operate under. And that is the call to action that I'm asking you to do. Will you be that warrior of the rainbow? Will you hold government and others to account and say, we need to do more? We may need to make this a priority now. Will you also sacrifice some of the comforts that you have right now? Because that's what we need. We are living beyond our means. The consumerism that we have is causing a lot of this havoc, you know. When you look at the pandemic, there were a lot of messages that I got from it, and maybe you didn't. But during the pandemic, when everything shut down, when industry and production was at a standstill, some of the most polluted cities in the world saw their air quality improve. The smog lifted. The hole in the ozone layer closed. People could see the Himalayas for the first time in a long time because it was crowded and poor air quality. So what that was showing us is that if we reduce our consumerism, if we stop producing for the sake of capitalism and making money, you know, we can stop some of these impacts that we are having. But that means that you and I have to make changes. And we also have to make sure that those with the rich pockets, the deep pockets, these oil companies and all those that are doing what they are doing, you know, can't keep buying politicians and saying, we're promising all these jobs, you know, so keep giving us our permits. You know, we have to be challenging that and singing in unison. Because I think if we speak with that one voice, government will have to listen and they'll make the changes that we need to have, you know. So that's what I speak of, is we need that Indigenous knowledge. So thank you.
Thank you, Kevin, for reminding everyone of what has always been known, and that Indigenous knowledge is what we need. And what you said really resonated with me about Indigenous people being the original scientists. That is certainly something that I've always said, and that knowledge needs to be respected. So I will now embark on a general Q&A session with our panelists, and we will take questions from the audience that is here, as well as questions online. And I'll just start first by a question for Suzanne. Suzanne, what is your view on forest carbon credit projects that are being proposed and established as one of the natural climate solutions? I believe you're muted, Suzanne.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, you know, carbon doesn't represent everything, but it is the best indicator that we have now that is globally recognized of ecosystem health. All species are made of carbon. You know, the world is replete with carbon, and it's, you know, it gets distributed in different ways. And right now it's overly distributed to the atmosphere. It's because we've been extracting oil and gas, and we've been extracting, you know, wood from forests. And this has created an imbalance in our globe. And so one of the ways we can get that balance back, and we know that CO2 and greenhouse gases are a major cause of climate change. One way we can rebalance is to rebalance carbon. And it's easy to measure in forests and oceans. People understand it, or at least we are rapidly getting an understanding of it, and it's tradable. And so I think that that if we have a carbon as our currency instead of 2x4s and gold or anything we're extracting from the earth, that we are regenerating carbon and use that as a currency, we can shift our economy really quickly from one that is protecting and regenerating us, our global world, our global cycles, to one, you know, that is really, from one that is destroying them to regenerating them. So I have a great deal of hope in the carbon economy, but we have to value carbon at what it truly is valued. And so there are a lot of caveats, or a lot of things to watch out for. And you know, any kind of system is open to corruption or to taking advantage of systems, and we've got to really watch out for that. But I think that once we really put an appropriate price on carbon, close off loopholes for people to exploit the carbon economy, that it really, for me, and I think we'll rapidly see that it really is a very positive way of moving forward. And I think, you know, globally, that once we get on board, that we can shift this over fairly quickly.
Thank you for sharing that, Suzanne. I have the next question for Hannah. How can we get the Premier and the government to listen to the science? Tough question.
It is a tough question, but there are so many different groups and so many different ways to get involved with showing our government that that is a priority for us as citizens. So yeah, my colleague Flossie is going to be sharing our kind of engagement portal. So encourage you to get involved with us. CPAWS-BC does amazing work, and Suzanne's projects. There's just so many different people that are doing a lot of work. I think in filing this lawsuit, you know, governments do have a lot of pressure from lobby groups, from the oil and gas industry. And I think it is really important for groups to be putting pressure to balance out the pressure that is coming from those lobby groups as well. So I would just encourage everyone, in whatever way you can and that feels appropriate for you, to make your voice known and your values known, because I think that our governments really need to hear from us to have that courage to step up. Like, we can see governments around the world are struggling to keep those commitments, and it requires a big shift in the way that we do economic development, and a big cultural shift. And they need to know that citizens are requiring that, are expecting that of them, and are behind them in doing that. So yeah, thank you for that question.
Thank you, Hannah. I have a question for Kevin. How can the youth get involved, Indigenous youth, and what can we help them as they go forward and try to help the climate emergency?
Good question. I find there's three groups of people that can generally get the ear of government. Seniors, you don't want to piss seniors off. Youth are the other one that all elected people always acknowledge that youth are our future, the next leaders. And so they should know that they have that kind of power, natural power to them. The third group I find are Indigenous people, that when we speak with truth, they can't avoid that, because they know that the facts are there, that there's so many things that are going wrong in our communities. And when we call for action, that it commands attention, you know. So those three groups, I think, are ways of, you know, tackling these kind of things. But youth have that natural energy that we can tap into, where, you know, the linking them to elders, for example, and sharing that those stories and igniting in them. You know, I find a lot of youth today, for example, especially Indigenous youth, they may not have the same level of trauma that the older generations have had, but they know that they want change. They know they want something to be different, and they're demanding it now. And so that energy we have to tap into, and by linking it to our elders and mentoring them and showing them the way. I was about 12 years old when I used to sit in chief and council meetings and listen, and my uncle never chased me out. I just saw him talking to government and making demands and telling them what needed to happen. And that's where I learned my advocacy, by seeing my elders, my leaders in action. And I think we need to do more of that.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. I have a question for the group from a forestry student here at UBC. In terms of active restoration, such as post-logging, what actions like soil reinoculation should we focus on?
I can take that question. There are some basic principles. So, you know, ecosystems have legacies, and, you know, they're usually the old things in the ecosystems. And when I say old, I don't just mean chronologically, but highly evolved as well. And these legacies really are the foundation of forests, of forest societies. And so they have the genes, they have the carbon stocks, they have the energy cycles right within them. And so leaving those old legacies is absolutely essential to restoring an ecosystem. It's like having the elders, you know, teach the youth, as Kevin was talking about. And so, you know, the one thing that we don't do very well, or haven't done over the last 50 years, is leave those legacies behind. So that means leaving the old mother trees instead of going after them for their profits, right? So if, you know, so that's one of the keys to restoration, is those nuclei in the forest. So old trees, old fungal networks, old logs, old huckleberry bushes, they are all important in rejuvenating the forest. And so, and then if those things have been taken away, if the ecosystem is so degraded that there's very little legacy left, you can bring those things back. You know, you can restore soil, you can compost, you can add seeds, you can add those genes back, and slowly you'll see that ecosystem self-recover. So that's the amazing thing about this world, is that it is meant to regenerate. It's got a huge regenerative capacity. It wants to heal itself. All we need to do as people is help it along. And we do have such an important role in doing that. You know, we've degraded it, but we can also restore it. And so, you know, so those legacies also include our hands, right? The earth needs our hands as human beings to go and help restore legacies, help restore the seed, and help regrow the forest. Yeah, and maybe inoculation is part of it. Maybe restoring the mycorrhizal networks has to be done too, but we can do that kind of thing.
Thank you, Suzanne. I wish we had a lot more time for all of the questions that are pouring in, but I would like to ask one final question and hear an answer from each one of our panelists. What is your outlook to the future as we try to address the climate emergency? We'll start with Hannah.
Well, I think probably, like so many of my friends and family, it's kind of a mixture of fear and hope. So it's really scary seeing some of the changes that are happening and hearing what different knowledge holders and scientists are saying about the risks and challenges that we're facing. And then at the same time, there is so much beauty, so much life that is around us all the time. And I am constantly learning about how to be a better person myself, in terms of how to, like I was talking about in my talk, like how to step more fully into respectful relationships with the beings and communities that I'm part of. And so that getting to be part of that process and learning from others about how to do that in a good way feels really hopeful to me. So it's a mix, and it can change from hour to hour and day to day, but I'm really grateful to be part of really inspiring communities that are working to make things better.
And Suzanne or Kevin?
For me, what I would recommend is we need to start linking more to an adaptation strategy and being basically getting emergency preparedness, because it's going to get worse before it gets better. You know, here in Metro Vancouver, even though the infrastructure was affected last year with the mudslides and things like that, we still had goods and services. We still had things coming in, but we did have to watch our gas consumption stop, things like that. But can you imagine if that starts to happen all across North America at the same time? You know, and that's, you know, our cell phones won't be working. We won't have the privilege of, you know, running to the grocery store, because there can be very significant impacts. So on the individual level, we have to be prepared for those kind of instances. Going back to the era of my parents, when we lived off the land and provided for ourselves, I could do that now. I could be out in the woods and survive, but I'm in the middle of a city, you know, and so we need to find ways of controlling as much as we can our situations until we get things in a better state. So I would encourage everybody to start learning about emergency preparedness.
So those are all both, you know, I agree with Hannah and Kevin. I have fear and hope, and I think that being prepared is essential. I think I'll just say that, you know, we often talk about tipping points, and I say this often, but tipping points, we're scared of them, right? That things can suddenly change for the worse. And certainly the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, has talked about tipping points. I think the fires in the heat dome are indicators of that. Those are negative tipping points, right? That's where things change rapidly for the worse. But the way that our systems are wired also means they can change rapidly for the better. And so that means that, you know, as an ecosystem, for example, think about a forest and it's been degraded, and building on my example before, as it starts to build, it can be slow and imperceptible at first when you add those things back, but suddenly there can be massive changes. Suddenly the trees are closing crown, there's deciduous plants, there's mosses coming up, and it starts to draw down CO2 fairly quickly. So our systems are built that way. Our social systems are built that way. Our ecosystems are built that way. Even our man-made transportation and communication systems are built that way. And so I think that the point here is that we're wired to recover, but we have to have agency in this. We have to be active players. And Kevin talked about, you know, youth working with elders. That's something you can do right now, is go and ask your elder, you know, how do I rebuild my garden? Or how do I plant a tree if you don't know how to do that? How do I grow my own vegetables? That knowledge is there. And when we all as a global community start acting on these little acts, they add up to big tipping points for the better. So I say, let's get busy, you know, start doing positive things, be prepared, but also be active and have agency in your own future.
Thank you, Suzanne, Hannah, and Kevin, for sharing your perspectives there on that final question. And I share those same thoughts. And thank you as a panel to sharing the lessons learned and the principles of mother trees, climate litigation, and Indigenous knowledge. And it's a real privilege to moderate this session. And thank you so much for the gifts of your knowledge and perspectives. And I'm going to turn it over to Flossie Baker, the lead organizer of the Sierra Club BC, to share a special call to action and how everyone else can share their gifts. Take it away, Flossie.
Thank you so much. So in the spirit of hurrying along good tipping points, I have a very special invitation that I'm honored to share with you tonight. Suzanne already alluded to it, but I'm just going to spend a few moments talking you through it. So let me just share my screen. I'm not going to talk you through all of this, don't worry. I just want to hone in on a few pieces of our action portal. You might recognize some of the artwork from the Seeing Through Watcher's Eyes picture that Hannah showed, because it's done by the same artist, Charlene George. If you scroll down a little bit, we come to this large picture of an octopus, which I love. And the octopus is big and central because actually the Pacific octopus was the whole inspiration for our action model. We were inspired by the octopus. As it says here, octopus has 3 hearts, 9 brains, 8 tentacles, and yet moves as one. Now is the time to bring our different gifts together. And so, yeah, we're really inspired by octopus's ability to bring all these different pieces together and yet somehow still move as one, also to do so quite gracefully. And so in the spirit of trying to bring together lots of different parts, lots of different people, lots of different parts of society, lots of different ideas, lots of different tentacles, we've kind of taken this vision of the octopus and tried to apply it on a macro scale. And if we scroll down a bit further, we come to this gorgeous image of a swan and the text that says, "Come together, you along with raven, orca, eagle, wolf, and our other relatives have gifts that could work well together. When we bring our unique gifts into collaboration, anything is possible." And I just love this language because it reminds us that, like the mother trees and like the raven and like the orca, all these relatives are working so hard to try and hold the web of life together along with us. And as Kevin said, if we can just learn to listen to that better, then so much more imagination and potential for change emerges. And if you keep scrolling, you get to these 5 different groups that you can sign up to. I'm not going to go through all of them because they're pretty obvious, but I just want to hone in on a couple. And the first one is the artist group. So this is a group for artists, whether you're a hobby artist like myself, or you're a pro, whether you paint or you dance or you photograph, you are needed. And we have just hired an artist organizer to really help get this group off the ground. So if you join this group, you'll get invitations to different creative prompts. You'll be invited to art classes. We had a printmaking night. We had an online art class. It's a really great group. Then there's the ambassador group, and this is symbolized by the orca. And this is for anyone who is really good and into spreading the word about important stories in their circle, whether that's friends or family, or ideally an organization. So if you join this group, then we will send you a couple of stories a month or podcasts that you can share with your circle, whether it's about old growth or climate justice. But we'll make sure that they're like really strategic to the campaign that we're in, or the like public conversation that's happening. And so if you're part of an organization with like an e-bulletin, maybe a faith group, then that would be the perfect place for those stories. And finally, the last group I want to touch on is the nurturers group. And this is for anyone who is taking care of a young person in their life, whether they're a grandparent or a teacher, and they're just looking for some support for helping to connect the children in their life with nature. There's all kinds of resources in there. And it's also just a really lovely space for different nurturers to come together, because it's so hard being a nurturer right now. Just next week, we're having an online drop-in for how to talk to your kids about climate anxiety, for example. So obviously there is so much change that can happen within these groups, but also when there is a strategic moment, when there's a key moment in a campaign, we can bring them all together, and that will be extremely powerful. And one campaign that we're so excited about that's coming up, that we're collaborating with CPAWS on, is to try and get the BC government to pass species at risk legislation to try and help our relatives, the orca, the woodland caribou, the marble murrelet, who are all really endangered. And we're calling that campaign, "Why Are Our Relatives Leaving?" And there's going to be so many rich opportunities to bring the artists and the nurturers and the ambassadors together to try and touch as many people as possible. So I'll leave it there. Please, if you do one thing tonight, go and sign up on this website. The link will be in the chat, and know that you are so needed in this moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Flossie. That's great to hear all the different ways you can get involved. And we know CPAWS has volunteer opportunities. Lots of NGOs in BC have opportunities. We at the Sustainability Hub like volunteers too, and you're welcome to share your gifts with us. So it's my honor to give the final goodbye and thank you. It's been a wonderful discussion. It's been so exciting to learn more about mother trees and to hear from experts like Suzanne and Hannah and Kevin and Danielle. And we really, really appreciate their participation, the donation of their valuable time, probably the most valuable commodity. And they've given us all such hope. We know the Secretary General has been quite very moving in the way he talks about climate change, Code Red for Humanity, Atlas of Human Suffering, a litany of broken promises. And it is urgent and it is an emergency, but what we've heard today is that there are ways to address it. We can protect our forests, we can save our mother trees, we can study and work with community, build community, we can volunteer, we can sue the government if needed, we can foreground Indigenous knowledge. There's so many things we can take. And here at UBC, as a learning institution, we take our jobs very seriously about educating, but also giving back and having an impact beyond campus. So I just want to really, really thank our moderator, Danielle Ignace. I want to thank again our panelists, Danielle, thank them, all our panelists and Flossie for their wonderful gift of their time. And so a little round for them. I want to thank all of you here today with us in person and for your questions. We will keep all your questions. We will record them. For those directed at the Sierra Club or CPAWS, we will share them directly with them. We know Dr. Simard is so busy, we will share them with her too, but we can't necessarily promise you a response, but we are making a record of these questions and we will share them. So thank you for your active participation. It's really appreciated. And then my final thank you goes to this technical team around us. We've got a great set of people that we have the privilege and honor of working with today. And maybe I'll just get everyone who works at the Sustainability Hub to just wave an arm if they're in the room, so we can thank them. And please join us, sign up for our newsletter, go to climateemergency.ubc.ca, as well as the other sites you've seen tonight. And thanks for joining us today.